jump into it. Sorry for the delay.
That's all right. So,
And why don't you guys tell me your two names that I see right in front of me here?
my name's Jeremy.
I'm Kaylee.
Jeremy and Kaylee. Super. Fire away.
So we have some questions today,
All right.
and our first question is, oh, sorry.
No questions? Okay.
Sorry.
All good.
We got questions. It's about the substitute House bill,
Which number?
1046.
Yep.
And our first question is, when was the bill written and who wrote it?
So the bill was written early this year, or maybe even late last year. And my suspicion, I haven't talked to the sponsor directly about that piece, but Representative McEwen's from the Shelton area. And so my suspicion is that either he or a staff person that works for him wrote that, or that somebody brought it to him from his community with a concern complaint about the testing requirements. And so it's actually unusual to see something of this magnitude just have one person on it. Usually there's a lot of coordination around something that's this high profile, and they'll have, a team of folks working on it. So my suspicion is that either is that someone who works for Representative McEwen, either on committee staff or maybe on Republican staff, may have written that for him.
Oh, okay.
If you ever want to pull up the bill page, we can do that.
Why don't you do that? Why don't you pull up that in 1508?
So our next question is,
Why is it that private schools don't have to take state tests?
Why is it that they don't have to take what?
State tests.
That's a good question. I think that that's based on probably history and the fact that many of them don't take state funds, and so they're not subject to the same requirements as schools that are paid for by the state, because they're independent. They can set some of their own rules, including, well, a lot of different things that are their own rules. And so that's why private schools are treated differently in law sometimes than public schools are.
cool. Next question is, how long can special ed students stay in the system?
I don't know that. I can find that out, but yeah, I don't know.
And what effect does it have?
Does having them in or out of the system?
Yeah.
Number of different things. I mean, it could be beneficial for them, obviously, to be in the system longer if it takes them longer to complete work or whatever. I don't know any of you have experience with IEPs, but my one of my kids had IEPs as part of their schooling, and some more time means more time, and so maybe it means an extra 6 months, maybe it means an extra year to complete your work. So that's part of it. I don't know. I believe that funding on a per student basis continues until age 21. And so that may be the additional time that someone has to complete, whether they're, still plugging along, but at a slower pace, or whether they leave and come back. I think age 21 may be that cutoff point, whether it be for, one of you who leaves the school system and then comes back and can still use the state funds for completing your graduation requirements, or for a special ed student to sort of plug along at a slower pace. I think the benefit, the downside is, that's more money to help somebody sort of go at a slower pace, as opposed to money that you could spend on somebody else, theoretically. But I think that the way that things are done, it works pretty well and lets everybody continue at their own pace. One of my kids had a concussion that delayed her graduation by 6 months, right? Because she was home with medical symptoms for 6 months, and so wasn't able to do much schoolwork. So by getting some special accommodations, she was able to do stuff online, and is now finishing up.
Cool.
Do the tests show ability for students to be gainfully employed and engaged citizenship?
Could you say it again? I didn't hear that all. You have a soft voice, Kaylee. Sorry.
Do the tests show ability for students to be gainfully employed and engaged citizenship?
Why are we discriminating against Kaylee? I'll let Kaylee ask the question. I just want to hear more clearly, Jeremy, for crying out loud.
I asked him to ask.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I didn't mean to call you out, Jeremy. I didn't mean to call you out, but I'm apologizing for it. Do the tests allow? I mean, not really. I mean, that was one of the things that when the tests were put in place, people thought there'd be some sort of good housekeeping seal of approval, right? Like an SAT score or a or whatever, showing some sort of mastery, getting an IB, diploma or something. But to the extent that it just became routine and that there was so little agreement about whether or not the tests were effective, much less whether they were a good measurement of success, that became so watered down as to be meaningless, I think. And so I think that's why there's so many people who think that it's not worthwhile continuing the test as a graduation requirement, is just that it doesn't really say anything to anyone anymore, or whatever it says is something different to everybody. So why bother?
You guys should be cheering for that.
So is that really going to go away?
I don't know. Depends on whether this bill passes. And class of 2017, if to the extent that any of you are in that cohort, I know my daughter is looking at that with great anticipation. It looks, knock on wood, it looks very positive. There seems to be a pretty broad consensus around it, whereas as late as last year, you couldn't have gotten a bill like that out, even with a lot of work. And sometimes it's a matter of timing and just how events develop. And I think that there's been enough. There's so much work going on around education policy in general that this has sort of fallen down as where it used to be front and center. Now it's sort of like, yeah, whatever, right? And then a ton of other states that did do it now have discontinued it. So there's only used to be like half of states or something did these types of tests, and everybody was getting on board with it, and we joined that sort of trend. And then people either realized it didn't do much, or it didn't do enough, or it didn't do what they wanted to, started discontinuing it. So now my understanding is there's only like a dozen states that still do it. And so, sometimes it's just timing and being in the right place in history, so to speak, to see that, to get that done. And so, again, knock on wood, this seems to be something that's fallen by the wayside, both amidst all the big picture stuff and the fact that in the end, rather than being the, some sort of, gold seal of approval, it turned out to be meh.
So who do you think would be against this? I mean, it was so popular in the last, 8 years. It was the test, the graduation was connected to the test. Who would still be, what's up on the hill that you think we should write to or talk to and might still want to connect high school graduation to a test?
Well, I'll take that as sort of two separate questions. One is who still thinks this is a good idea. The second piece, who do you have to talk to about that? And that's not necessarily the same folks, right? The folks that think that this is a good idea, there may be nothing you can tell them that will change their mind on that, right? Certainly, at least out in stakeholder land. So there are certainly business groups. There are the educational testing companies. I think we talked about that a little bit at one point when you guys were down here in Olympia, that, there's some people who make some serious bank, right, off of administering these tests. And certainly they have, statistics and advocacy showing that this is the way to go. And there's still some business groups that believe that a diploma doesn't, mean as much as it used to. So we need to make it harder to get a diploma, or at least add elements to a diploma so that it means more than it does right now. And this testing is one way to do that. And so those are the folks that I think are most invested in it. And certainly there are legislators and other decision makers who believe that way as well. I think right now, again, those folks aren't going to necessarily have their mind changed on this. I think the folks that are important to target with messages are the folks that are either, well, we talked, I think, at one point about how I think about my communications with folks as moving somebody on a 5-point continuum, right? So maybe we'll circle back to that as we talk a little bit here about advocacy and its goals and how to do it and why. So you got everything from people who will jump up and down in support of a piece of legislation or idea, and everybody who will jump up and down in opposition to it, right? So on this, on this particular piece, we got folks who will never be convinced. So at a certain point, it doesn't make a lot of sense to pay a lot of time and attention to, turning yourself blue in the face talking to them, because they're not going to get their mind changed. In some ways, on the other side, there's folks who are already all in on this. They believe that it's a bad idea based on personal experience or philosophy, and they're not going to, and we can sort of add to their stack of letters in support of the idea, but we're not necessarily going to change their mind with our actions. Then there's the sort of middle three pieces that are the folks who oppose this policy right now, because oppose the bill because they like the testing requirements, that maybe a letter from you or hearing from you and others might soften up their opposition to that bill a little bit. And whereas they were leaning towards voting no, now maybe they're going to think about it a little more. They're the folks who are already leaning towards and probably support, yeah, I'm going to vote for it. So, but it's not a big deal to me. But here's a letter from these kids in Spokane, and they were very articulate and had personal examples about how this could help or hurt them. So all of a sudden, you know what? I'm going to get up on the floor of the Senate and I'm going to make a speech about this and I'm going to use this letter I have from these kids that says, hey, my name's Kaylee, and this could mean the difference between me being able to get a job and me not being able to get a job, to continue doing my job versus not being able to continue to do my job, to me having to come back to school for another year for no particular good reason except to pass this stupid test versus whatever. Sorry to put you on the spot, Kaylee. I'd already picked on Jeremy. So those are the folks that I think are, and then there's the folks that are truly undecided. They haven't heard enough, understood enough, are still doing that balancing act, and then us sending a letter to them could help tip them, particularly if it's somebody from Spokane. So, right, there's 5 legislative districts that include Spokane County that some of you may be from, only 2 that from the city of Spokane, but so a letter from the local area that has a strong opinion on this and particularly speaks with the voice of not old farts like me, but who have an academic interest in this, but you guys that actually are living and breathing in it and it can make a huge difference one way or the other in your lives. I think that makes a huge impact. And so I think a letter from you all on this to depending on the timing, either to your local senators, to the chair of the committee, an open letter that's just to the legislature as a whole, what have you, that then, a letter doesn't have to stay with the person you send it to. You make copies and you send it out to everybody, either electronically or hard copy, and your voice gets out there a little more broadly about, here's why this is important to me. Here's the difference that this makes one way or the other with me. And maybe we move someone along that continuum and get to those 25 votes and overcome overcome the opposition of somebody who right now is in the position of just saying no. And instead of just saying no, they'll say, all right, I'm still going to vote no, but I'm not going to block this, because that's a powerful thing as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Coolness.
A follow-up question. Nick, it's Curtis.
Yeah. Hey. Can you come up here so I can hear you? I can just barely hear you.
Hi, Nick. It's Curtis.
Hey, Chris.
Cynical question, I'm sorry, but I have to ask it. So the makers of these tests, there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars involved with.
I would say millions is worth saying, yes.
Okay. So how much influence does the money behind testing have with the legislatures as far as my story versus a lot of money?
That depends. That depends on how good your story is. I think that money always plays a role, right? None of us can say. I mean, we can all say, money doesn't make all the difference in the world to me, but it certainly will make some difference, right? They say everyone has their price. I wouldn't do something stupid for $1, but I might do something stupid for $1 million, right? And so, or I would convince myself that it wasn't that stupid after all. Or wrong in this case, in a political sense or an ethical sense. So the money always, is always going to be a factor. But I think that in the end, particularly in a situation like this, where this is a bigger issue and money doesn't overcome the weight of personal stories. I mean, almost everybody has kids or had a kid that has been in the education system, and therefore everybody has some sort of an opinion about what it means to have these tests, have their kids go through it. It was good enough for me. I don't know why it's not good enough for them, right? All that stuff. So I think the money makes a difference, but that the personal stories and personal contacts make more of a difference. So what I would say is, if in fact this is the bill that you guys have chosen to weigh in on, I think it's a perfect bill because it does let your voice be heard very strongly. What I would do is say, let's write ourselves a letter that uses your personal stories, maybe even bullets from some of you who want to speak out on it, either named by name or not, and send that to the 5 senators from Spokane County and say, hey, we're from Mead Alternative School in high school in Spokane, and we want to make sure that you, our elected officials, know how we feel about this piece of legislation. And most of them aren't on the record yet on this legislation. And so we don't know how they feel. And so being able to get a response from them would be good. And I think that's the last piece of that is, you ask in the letter, hey, could you please let us know how you feel about that? And then I can go to their respective offices and say, hey, is there a chance we could get you on this TVW connection with the kids from Mead Alternative High School, either at our regularly scheduled time like this or at some other special time, so that you have the chance to talk to Senator Billig, who's on the Senate Early Learning and K-12 Education Committee, and is from it represents downtown Spokane, or Senator Baumgardner, who represents the South Hill area, and talk to him about this, and he's a Republican, and so he and Senator Billig have very different opinions on this, or potentially do, and have them talk to you about that. And even if we're not able to get them live and in person, can we generate some sort of response from them that says, yes, I agree with you, no, I don't, and here's why, or always the best feedback is, hey, thanks for your input. I hadn't known prior to this I didn't have a strong opinion on this previously. Now your letter has convinced me to do X, Y, Z. And you get a letter or an email or something back from them that indicates what their vote is going to be and why that is. And, and if, good news, they tell you that it actually had something to do with your communication. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How do you guys feel about doing something like that, about working on a letter to folks in the next week or so around getting that bill out of committee and getting it up for a vote in the Senate so that you don't have to take that stupid test in a couple months?
I'd say that sounds pretty good.
I thought you might be motivated on that.
Do you know when they're going to vote on it?
I do not. Dave, can you pull that up so they can see it as well? Dave has
We have the technology.
they have the technology. Now I can't see it. Oh, there we go. Can you pull that, go down on that? All righty. So you can see it passed the House 92-6. It got heard last Tuesday, or I guess this Tuesday in the Senate committee. It has not yet been scheduled. They would say on there when it was scheduled for a vote. If it had been, they have that next week. They have some stuff scheduled, but it's not yet, it looks like, put on the agenda. So we'll find that out when that is. I can try to find that out today from even the committee chair and see what he's planning to do and so forth, and then get back to you on that. But I would say, again, not to dictate Ms. Sahagian's curriculum, but if by Monday or Tuesday next week we were able to have a letter from you guys on this, and I'm happy to work with you on that, either to give you a sort of outline of how I would do it, or have you guys do something and then edit it, subject to your approval, to send to folks by like next Tuesday. I think that's probably a good timeline for trying to make some impact on this. Thank you, Dave.
Cool.
Ms. Sagan, does that make you break out into hives, or does that sound rational?
That sounds pretty rational.
You're not Ms. Sagan.
Not here today.
Oh, sorry.
We're filling in for her being gone, but I think that we could probably make that happen.
Okay, Chris, thank you. And thank you too, Jeremy. I was just picking on you again. What else can I answer for you guys?
How was financial education?
Just have a suspicion that there's a list of questions written up on the board. I don't know that for sure. Maybe you're both looking in the same place for your inspiration, but sorry.
That might have been a good guess. That was financial education going to be added into school ed via, what does that say? Chris Ray Rectal. Thank you.
So there's been a bunch of conversation about that over time, both what's the right thing to give folks in terms of curriculum, as well as how that fits into everything else. There's so many requirements now, right, to make sure that you have, certain pieces of stuff taught, that trying to figure out how to fit in practical stuff, right? When I was a kid, back when I was your age, in junior high, we had a semester on career education, and a semester on I can't remember what it was called, financial management or whatever, financial skills, which I gather they don't do much at all anymore. And so I know that Superintendent Reichel now is interested in fitting that in. I don't know. I haven't seen that that's something that legislatively they're going to make a law about, but it's something that he might be able to require to have happen. I haven't heard how that's going, and I know that there's actually a staff person who I used to work with, who's at the state treasurer's office, who's working on that as well, what they call, financial literacy. So you're not just literate in X's and O's, but you're also literate in dollars and cents, or, Bitcoin or whatever it is now. So we just got a couple minutes left. Any last questions? Hey.
Hi, so I'm Jeff, and so one of the questions we have coming up just talks about, so if this bill goes through and passes, and it's no longer a graduation requirement, are all of those requirements for students to retest going to be then removed? Because because a lot of it, we're talking about the amount of days we spend testing.
Oh God, do I know?
But the amount of days we spend retesting is even more than the days we spend testing in the first place. Will those retest days?
I would assume so.
Okay.
Yeah. And why is it that there's so many retest days? Just lots of folks missing it, or just making sure that there's the opportunity for folks to get as many shots in before graduation?
Right. So like if you don't pass the first time, then you've got to take the makeup, and then the makeup, and then there's, you've got 3 different, like, you've got to cover all our bases. So
Yep.
if they've taken, all these extra tests, is that going to be something that will no longer be an issue probably, or is there
I
going
would
to
assume so. And again, it depends on when they put it into place, right? And how soon they get to it and when they put it into place. And so they say, or in the bill, right, it's for the 2017 graduating class. So it would be in time for graduation this year. I can look into and talk to the folks working in favor of it about what the thought process is around how that would work, because obviously the sooner they do it, the sooner it goes into effect, the sooner you can plan ahead for that and know that you have those dates open for something else, as opposed to having to hold them for, or God forbid, do the test and do the retest, while waiting to see whether or not it's even required, which seems like a colossal waste of time for everybody involved. So I can try to find that out ASAP from the folks that are supporting and moving the bill forward about what the administrative pieces are on that. But my initial response would be, yeah, that sure would make a lot of sense, but I can't say that they always make a lot of sense when they put laws into place either, or think about everything.
Would that also include like all of the COE classes that exist? Would those no longer be a necessity?
I don't know, COE.
Collection of evidence. They're basically a class, and that you turn in pieces of work basically to show you're competent, that will like if you didn't pass the SBA ELA, you
Gotcha.
send a collection of evidence.
Yep. Gotcha. It can serve as an alternative way to pass the requirements. Again, depending on how they do it, yes, I would assume that would be something that would be wise to do. Again, I'll look into it with the folks that are supporting that and the folks that are staffing, because oftentimes the staff have the deepest knowledge about what the details are and figure out what's been thought of and what hasn't been thought of. I would say that would be between now and the time you hear back from me, if there's a way for you to put, if you're going to be generating a letter, I'd put that in there to make sure that you specifically address that from the standpoint of how is this going to work, so that we know ahead of time how we're going to apportion our time between now and graduation. So if you're comfortable with it, I can do a quick outline and email it to who should I be? If
email it to Karina, because she's kind of been the head person on this.
Will do. So I'll email it to Karina and with just sort of my advice about that, and we can take it from there. And then my experience before is letting the kids fill in the blanks on that, and then us as the sort of guidance folks on that, helping to polish it up is usually the best way to go, because the less canned it sounds coming from us as adults, and the more authentic voice from them as kids, I think the better we are to make a difference, because they have lots of canned letters from lots of stodgy folks like us. Not that you're stodgy, Jeff, or Curtis either, but and not a lot of genuine input from folks who sound like they are living this situation. Does that work?
Yeah, thank you.
Super. I'll get an outline sent to Karina today, and we'll get cracking.
Excellent.
Terrific. Dave's giving me the high sign that we're out of time.
Alrighty.
Sorry that I had to reschedule our time. Things are going fast and furious. A little bit of a dumpster fire over here right now. So look forward to keeping working with you guys.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Have a great weekend.
So long.